Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 175 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. I am down here in the bunker with my good friend and excellent co-host, Dr. David C. Noe. David, how you feeling today?
Did you call me David?
I think I get to call you David.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is that a sign of a newfound respect?
No, not at all.
Okay. Still feeling pretty pensive, frankly.
Really?
On a Friday afternoon. This is the last day before we enter that month that shall not be named.
Yeah, let's not talk about
that you like to talk about so much.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling quite pensive. Till Armageddon, no shalom, no shalom. Then the father hen will call his chickens home. The wise man will bow down before the throne, and at his feet they'll cast their golden crowns when the man comes around.
It's more Johnny Cash.
More Johnny Cash.
Yeah, excellent. So you've been spinning Johnny Cash all week?
Just that song.
Really?
I tried a few others, but I have this kind of monophonia. I don't know if that's the right term, but when I like to listen to something, I listen to it until I'm exhausted of it.
Really?
Yep. And then I move on.
Okay. And so have you?
Then I come back to it.
So are you like done with this little mini Cash?
I don't know.
Okay.
Is that a problem?
It's not a problem. I just kind of
Okay.
I'm always trying to figure out how you tick. I still haven't.
Yeah.
For all these years, I haven't figured it out yet.
Speaking of how I tick and
Yeah.
how you tick, what's with the title of the last episode?
Oh, you mean the Milkman cometh?
Right.
What you're asking me? You're the one who came up with it.
Yeah, but I wasn't sold on it, and we ran this through an AI, as you remember.
Yeah.
I said to the Gemini AI, which is a Google product, give us some potential podcast titles based on the church father Lactantius, and make puns on his name that has to do with milk.
Did you type all of that into Gemini?
Yes. I mean, what? Does that seem like a lot? It's 20 seconds?
No, I find I don't use AI that much. I find it just still kind of strange and weird.
Well, I feel that same way about it, but I'm trying to make peace with the future.
Okay, all right.
If I can't make peace with the past or the present, well, what's left?
True.
So it's spit out a long list of suggestions,
Yes.
like occurred above the rest.
Yeah.
And you panned them all.
They were lame.
Yeah.
They were lame. So, yeah, you sent me a bunch of these suggestions.
Just for fun, just
Right.
for kicks and grins, as
And
they say.
your kind of working title for the episode was The Milkman Cometh. And
Right.
I wrote back to you, I like yours the best.
Yeah.
Let's go with that.
But I don't really know why we went with that title. What does it even mean, as the
Right.
kids say?
And so as we were talking before we went on air,
Right.
It's a reference to the Eugene O'Neill play, The Iceman Cometh. But that clearly you had heard that title somewhere along the lines.
I guess.
And
the something man cometh was stuck there.
right. But you weren't deliberately riffing on the Eugene O'Neill title. It's one of those things that's just out there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it was stuck in the back of my mind somewhere in the boxes and detritus of years of, being exposed to all kinds of words and so forth.
Yes, your subconscious suggested it, and I think to my mind, that makes it much more
interesting,
mysterious and alluring.
Have you read that play, Eugene O'Neill?
No, I don't know much about O'Neill other than that. I have the sense that he's kind of in that Camus Beckett box of you're not gonna walk out of a Eugene O'Neill play feeling great.
Right.
Whistling the
so it's not
soundtrack.
Like Top Gun Maverick?
No, I don't think, I could be wrong. Maybe a listener could correct. That's right.
So I guess it's all about self-delusion and despair.
Oh, wow, man. That's what I want to do on a Friday night.
Yeah.
No, thanks.
The Iceman cometh.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you haven't seen the play, the Eugene O'Neill play?
I have not seen the play. I know there was, growing up, there was a basketball player whose nickname was the Iceman.
Who was that?
Remember George Gervin? Does
No.
that name ring a bell?
No.
I don't think he's in the...
I remember Vanilla Ice.
That's what Iceman you don't want to see coming around.
A countryman of yours, right? Van Winkle?
That's right. His name is Robert Van Winkle.
There you go. You're practically bros.
No, I got no van. Right? No thanks.
Okay.
So I would rather have George Gervin as my Iceman than Mr. Vanilla.
I suppose. But speaking of having alienated listeners.
Yes. Uh-oh.
Do you remember a few episodes ago when I doubled down on hobby farming? Little plastic cows and little plastic horses. There was a name of a popular American author.
Yes. You're talking about Wendell Berry?
Yes.
Yeah.
And a longtime friend, a wonderful, wonderful friend who loves this podcast and has promoted it free of charge to all her friends and acquaintances, sent me some correspondence. I'm going to cover her name, but she said she was both... surprised and saddened.
Oh, no.
I was not so surprised that she was surprised. I was more surprised that she was saddened that I don't share her love for Wendell Berry.
Yeah. Okay.
So she's going to try to convince me that I'm wrong. That I need some, I don't know, some kind of correction there.
All right. Well, I guess that's a kind of shout out, a kind of a non-shout out we just gave them without naming names. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be kind of like I don't know, a Berry good episode, right? when I finally come around and embrace Wendell Berry.
Yeah, then we'll do a long series on Wendell. Well, I'm hoping it was a gentle correction.
Oh,
It wasn't an angry screed.
No. In our relationship, I'm the screeding one.
You're the screeder.
Yeah, she's the sweet person who said, "How come you don't like Berry?" Right? And us, that's. I don't know. So, but where are we going today, Jeff?
Well, this is going to be part 2 of our look at Lactantius.
Okay.
Last time, we did our best to kind of cover his biography, what's left of it. We tried to fill in the gaps, and we tried to kind of place him in the context of the bigger picture of Christian apologetics.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we cited such names as his instructor, Arnobius of Sicca, the North African.
Yep.
We talked about, I think it was you brought up Minucius Felix.
Yes.
Another apologist.
His North African countryman.
Yes. And we mentioned Tertullian, which is another North African. So we tried to look into this question, what's the deal with North Africans and exalted rhetoric?
Yeah.
Did we find an answer to that?
I don't think we really did. I mean, we threw some ideas around. We don't need to reiterate everything. Our listeners can, if they haven't gotten to that episode, they can go back and listen to
Jeff,
that.
we're trying to allure them. We're trying to entice them back to listen to the Milkman Cometh Part 1.
Part 1. Well, yeah. So that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
All
right.
If this is something that interests you, you can go back. But it is this fascinating, to my mind, not settled question of why is all of this this kind of Christian apologetic candle power coming out of North Africa as opposed to Byzantium or
it's a mystery.
Yeah,
it's a mystery. So there are basically 2 broad schools of thought on this, and maybe as an entree to the rest of the episode, we can get your take on this, and that is the great man theory.
Yeah.
As opposed to the social forces theory.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It used to be everything was the great man theory.
Right.
And I don't have any problem saying the great woman theory, like Queen Elizabeth and Emily Dickinson and Jane Austen, etc.
Yep.
But that is the notion that there's particular genius that comes along and it outshines the competitors in its particular environment.
Right.
And then, of course, the social forces theory is that there's something in the culture, something in the water. And so inevitably, individuals of great talent, they kind of bubble to the surface.
Yeah.
Like the cream rises to the top,
to the top.
Might say.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So is Lactantius, is he inevitable given the trajectory of North African rhetoric? Or did he have particular brilliance?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you could also say that why do we have to pick one over the other?
Yeah, but you're always doing that.
Right.
You're always doing it.
But I mean, I kind of like
so
that
what
idea.
Do you think? What?
So if we're talking, again, just to frame the chronology here, so Lactantius compared to his the other North African figures we mentioned, like Minucius Felix or Apuleius on the non-Christian side of things, or Tertullian.
And we didn't even mention Cyprian of Carthage, the big one.
There you go. Right. Lactantius is quite a few years distant. Right?
You're right.
So I like the idea of Lactantius kind of riding that wave that had been built and kind of sustained by other thinkers and speakers along the way. Yeah.
So if you want to combine the great man and the social forces theory, you could say, well, Lactantius born in 250, most likely.
Yeah.
Cyprian dying in 259, just 9 years later. Lactantius was in the right place because of all of the social pressure and the long trajectory of great rhetoric. And so tremendous change. I think you described it so well. The liminal space between Diocletian and Constantine, between East and West, between Greek and Latin.
Yeah.
And then he just kind of stood forth at the right moment with his towering genius.
I think so. Yeah, kind of right place, right time.
Okay.
Kind of before his conversion, he gets, I don't think we really know how, but he gets the attention of the powers that be.
That's right.
Recognizes his talent. Diocletian kind of packs him up and says, "This is what I want you to do.
Be the imperial raider."
Yeah, and so he's kind of placed in these corridors of power.
Right.
And that lasts till the end of his life, and that straddles his kind of his pre-Christian and Christian periods. Yeah.
So I want to ask you, when you teach history, do you veer to one pole or the other? The great man or the social forces? Do you try to represent both?
I do try to represent both.
Does this resonate with your students at all?
Very much. And so I'll present kind of these grand theories on day one, and say we're going to come back to this, and the various events of history that we'll analyze. We'll kind of look through these particular lenses. I think.
Right.
I think there's also those key moment, the key moment theory. There as I think of Constantine's conversion, whatever happened at the Milvian Bridge.
Right.
And I know there's lots of controversy about what that was, but
Right.
there is a kind of before and after.
For sure.
So
something happens.
There are these hinge moments in history.
That's a good point.
Where after them, nothing is the same anymore. I guess that you could say that's related to Constantine as a great man.
Yes.
As part of that theory, but
because that's the one who responds to the crucial moment.
Yes, right.
If you or I were at the Milvian Bridge, right, and we had this dream in hoc signo vinces, in this sign you will conquer, or even if we didn't have the dream, because some people doubt the thing ever occurred, right? It's Constantine the next morning who wakes up and says, "Get out the can of spray paint.
Yeah.
We're going to emblazon this on everybody's helmet and shield." You and I would have probably just gone down to Starbucks and thought about it for a while,
right?
Read some books,
stroll
around the block. Yeah. So it's not just the hinge moment, but it's the response of the individual.
Exactly right. And then you couple that with, I think what's some often called like the annals school of history, the idea of that you look at history through the wrong end of the telescope. You get this kind of this long bird's eye view and say,
I haven't heard of this before.
The forces of history move very, very slowly.
I see.
And you can really only understand how kind of this leads to that with kind of the expanse of centuries.
I see.
Right.
The retrospective.
Right. So. Well, but if you want to make history interesting, if you want to kind of grip an audience,
yes,
the great man, great woman theory
wins every time.
Wins every time.
That's true. Right? So I guess it's a different question than maybe we can ask, but why does that resonate so much with people? I think isn't it because we prefer to think of ourselves as the agents in each setting that we find ourselves?
But without a doubt,
I'm not the victim of circumstance. I'm the doer and the driver.
Yeah, and of course, you can identify with an individual much more easily than the grand sweep of forces over the course of decades and centuries.
Right. Yeah. Right. So I think you have an opening quote, and I want to get to a little tidbit on Diocletian a little later.
Yeah.
But let's get this opening quote first.
Yeah. So this quote comes from an article written way back in 1943, or in the middle of World War II, by one Brother Alban. Who wrote in Classical Weekly an article entitled "The Conscious Role of Lactantius." Now,
so this was written by Brother Alban?
Yes.
And not Sister Soldier?
Not Sister Soldier, right? Or Sister Sledge, right?
Who is that?
Oh, God, funk soul band from the 70s?
Never heard of it.
Okay, all right.
Johnny Pop strikes again.
So this is the first paragraph in his article. He writes, "In reading the first and fourth chapters of Book 5 of the Divine Institutes," which is, I think, we said last time, was probably the book that Lactantius is most famous for, yes?
Yes.
One is struck with the unusually clear understanding which their author evinces of his own role in the history of Western Christian culture. Lactantius shows himself fully aware that in the Latin Christian society of his day, there existed two schools of thought concerning the attitude of the church should assume towards the literature of the Greco-Roman world. The Humane Party, sought to bridge the chasm that separated pagan learning and the Christian faith, while the party of the intransients associated in a common condemnation of traditional worship of the gods and the writings of the pagan poets, historians, and philosophers. To Lactantius, on the eve of the Christianization of the empire, the victory of the former party seemed essential. If the faith were to make headway among the educated classes, pagan letters must become the handmaid of the Christian religion.
So what do you make of that, Jeff? Can you unpack that a little bit for me and the other listeners?
Yeah, well, I think this is a battle that rages to the present day.
Okay.
I think there are different strains of Christianity that are at odds as what to do with the larger kind of popular secular culture. And I think there are there are swaths of Christians out there say that if it's not biblical, if it's not directly related to the faith, then is therefore out.
Which they define as making some reference to the scriptures directly? Or seeking to serve
biblical
ideas?
Following under the umbrella of the Christian faith in some direct kind of way. Or a denomination of Christianity that would say, bring up children, say, there's no secular music, no movies,
right.
No television,
right.
unless it is particularly geared towards religious instruction.
Okay. Overtly designed to either teach things about the Bible or inculcate moral qualities of honesty and so forth.
Yeah, and seeing that which is outside of that as being misleading at best, evil at worst.
Okay.
And then I think where the pendulum swings the other way is to say that all things, or to kind of use the language of the Reformed Church, every square inch belongs to God.
Some Reformed churches.
Some. That and therefore you can find God's common grace in many, if not all things. Right?
So you're finding these kinds of conflicts or discussions that they're resonating around 300 AD at the time of Lactantius, according to the Brother Alban quote.
Right, and I found that when I've taught things about this period of history, and in discussion with my students, a lot of my students who come with very little knowledge about this period of history, the assumption is that when things switched to Christianity, that the reaction of early Christians was to go around burning things down, knocking down temples, and extinguishing things, and Lactantius is actually, in many ways, is arguing the opposite of that. That kind of thing, of course, did happen.
Right.
I was just talking the other week and talking about Zeus and the ancient Olympics and talking about when they were officially closed down.
Right.
It was in the hands of one of the early Christian emperors.
Yes.
And it was that the torch was snuffed out because it was a non-Christian pagan festival.
Right.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing did happen.
Indeed.
Yeah. A counter to that, and we'll get to Lactantius in a moment.
Yeah.
Patient listener. Is someone like John Chrysostom. I happen to be teaching on him a little bit this past week.
I know nothing about John. Tell me about it.
Oh, well, just a little bit. Because, there's a lot to be said. I'm following the biography by J.N.D. Kelly, which is called Golden Mouth. It's a brilliant biography.
Uh-huh.
So John, as a young man, was deeply schooled in three authors, Demosthenes, Plato, Homer. Mm-hmm. Right? And he was born around the time of Julian the Apostate. Right?
Yeah.
Which is the middle of the 4th century. Julian was 361 to 363, about an 18-month period. And so even though John and many of the Christians at the time were deeply troubled by Julian's reign and his attempt to revive paganism, it didn't lead them in their schooling to abandon the classical sources. So John knew, Chrysostom knew these three authors in particular, Demosthenes, Plato, Homer, deeply, extensively, had large portions of it memorized.
Yeah.
So you can trace his success as an orator probably to his study of Demosthenes. And I think Kelly says about it, this is very interesting, especially given Chrysostom's later negative attitude or critique of classical culture. So grown up in it, and you can only really address something intelligently if you have, I would say, some extensive firsthand knowledge of it.
Yeah, indeed.
And that's what he had.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. So that's all part of the same kind of conversation. And, and that's what are the dates again? So this would be a good 100 years after Lactantius' birth.
No, more like 100 years after his birth, for sure, but only 40 years after his death.
After his death. Okay. Yeah.
And I guess I have this impression, I could be wrong, that the pace of change in antiquity was much slower.
Right.
We've talked about this before, but think about how in the 20th century, the guy that invented the airplane, the Wright brothers, within his lifetime, he witnessed Chuck Yeager break the sound barrier.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And
First you can't fly, and then someone's faster than the speed of sound.
Right. And even given there's 66 years difference between Kitty Hawk and the moon landing.
Right.
There were people who had living memory of both of those events.
You're right.
It's mind blowing.
Right.
Yeah.
So at least technologically, a rapid change of pace. not experienced in antiquity.
Right. No, I'm just I'm finishing up a book right now. It's called Blood and Thunder, which is about
Top Gun Maverick?
No, it's a history of the Southwestern America in the 19th century, kind of centered around the figure of Kit Carson.
That is fascinating.
The great, mountain man.
Yeah.
And talking about
all those guys, Pecos Bill, Jim Bridger.
Yeah, it's a crazy time, and all of the all of the struggles between intertribal warfare, American and tribals, Mexicans and Americans, Mexicans and natives. It's chaotic.
Right.
But one of the things that the author Hampton Sides often comes back to is how slow news from Washington, how long it took to even get out to the Midwest. Like he covers the period of the Civil War, and these soldiers here that are manning these forts, out in Arizona and New Mexico, learning about Fort Sumter 7 months after it happened, right? And so
astonishing. What? There's a Civil War?
Right.
Which side am I on?
This glacial pace of everything, and then once you hit the 20th century, then that graph just kaboom.
That's a good point.
It explodes. Right?
So now, if the current president blows his nose, right? We all know about it instantly.
Exactly right.
It's really tremendous.
Right, and so with your interest in AI, you're just trying to stay ahead of this curve, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If I can't make peace with the past or the present, I try to make peace with the future. Right.
Gotcha. Yep.
So Diocletian, you want to hear this little tidbit about Diocletian?
I would love to.
Okay, so Diocletian had a thing for cabbages.
Oh, really?
Yes, as many Romans did.
Was cabbage a delicacy for
Are you kidding me? You know Cato the Elder, right? The old fellow who I guess was quite opposed to Greek, at least he said he was. Cato the Elder gives the advice that if you want to be able to hold your wine at a Roman party, now the wine was strongly diluted.
Indeed.
But if you wanted to hold your wine at a Roman party, you have to tank up on cabbage.
Is that like act like a sponge?
I guess so. Before you go, he says, this is his advice. I don't know if it's in De Re Agricultura or maybe in the Origenes. You can check Conte, actually. And he says, before you go to the dinner party, make sure you tank up on cabbage. Fill your stomach with cabbage. And then as the wine is, ingested, the cabbage will mostly absorb it.
Gotcha. And you'll be able to keep your wits about you.
That's right. But then you have the problem of a giant sphere or ball of wine-soaked cabbage in your abdominal cavity.
Very unpleasant.
Doesn't that seem awful?
That sounds horrible.
Okay, but back to Diocletian.
Yeah, so he had a thing for cabbage.
That's right.
All right.
So he retires from the office of the dominate right before Constantine comes to power, and he goes back to his hometown, which is a modern-day Split. It was ancient Salona, right? It's in Illyrium. And the Senate sends him a letter. And they say, Diocletian, without you, things are going down quickly, right? They're going to Hades in a handbasket.
Yeah.
And will you come back and assume power? Because we really need your steady hand, to right the ship of state.
Yeah.
And Diocletian famously responds, if you could see the cabbages I have grown with my own hands, you surely would never judge that a temptation.
Wow. Man, he went all Wendell Berry.
Oh, man. You got me. You pulled it. You pulled it all together.
So he was hobby farming.
The gentleman farmer.
And he could not be persuaded.
That's right. It's like the Cincinnatus move, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cincinnatus is at the plow, and the Roman Senate comes and says, "Save us from the Gauls." He reluctantly leaves behind his John Deere, right?
Right.
Or his International Harvester.
Yes.
Goes and beats up the Gauls, and then goes back to work.
Returns to his plow.
That's right.
Exactly. That's really so. Man, those must have been some cabbages.
Those must have been some cabbages.
Have you ever been to Split?
I haven't.
I think like
I'd like to go and leave real quickly.
Really quickly. But I think the remains of his palace there are.
Oh, there's some tremendous things.
Right,
You know who has been there as well as everywhere else that's archaeologically significant?
Yes.
Ken Bratt.
He has been there.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, one day. Let's steer this back towards Lactantius, right? I want to read another paragraph from Brother Albin's article here.
Yeah, and tell me again, when was this written? What's our source?
It's a classical weekly article from 1943.
1943. It's just like yesterday in classical times.
Indeed. So Albin writes, E.K. Rand aptly remarks that St. Paul, this is a quote, laid the foundation of Christian humanism. The apostle of the Gentiles, it is true, repudiates the wisdom of this world and warns the faithful, beware lest any man cheat you by philosophy and vain deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the elements of this world and not according to Christ. So that, at a glance, would seem like Paul
Right.
saying, beware.
Yeah, I think that's in Colossians, somewhere like that.
Yes, you are.
Is
you
that
are
right?
Yes, Colossians 2, verse 8. I see it
Okay.
right here. But the character of Paul is a many-sided one, and his discourse before the learned members of the Athenian Areopagus is clearly the speech of a man well-oriented in the learning of the schools,
Yeah.
of one who does not disdain to expound his Christian doctrine by references to the pagan poets. So, Dave, I wanted to ask you, so
Sure.
the tradition about Paul is that he's very well-educated, right? What do we know about his background? I mean,
Yeah, I could say a few things about that.
Okay,
Briefly. And I'm going to try to stay in my lane, as the kids say.
Yep.
So he was raised in Tarsus, we know that. And Tarsus was one of the 3 ancient university towns.
Aha.
It was the Ann Arbor, right?
Yes.
The Lansing, the Columbus
Yeah.
of the East. And Tarsus was especially famous for its Stoic learning. This doesn't prove that Paul learned Stoicism as a kid. It just means that it would be really difficult for someone to be raised in Tarsus and not know anything about the subject.
Yeah.
Especially someone who obviously had intellectual interests.
Yes.
Right? His father was probably a leather worker, because when Paul gets to Corinth, that's something he falls into quite easily.
That's right.
To make a living. And like most ancient cities, the learning was supported by different guilds, right? Just as in the medieval period. And so the Renaissance period. So he may very well have studied these kinds of things in Tarsus. Additionally, right, as Brother Albin points out, Paul was well familiar with Stoicism and Epicureanism, as he shows in Athens. And I'd like to get your feedback on this, but I've long been convinced that when Paul says in Romans 2, verses 13 and 14, right about there, he says, those who did not know the law, meaning the Mosaic law, by nature do what the law requires.
Yeah.
They show that the law is written on their hearts,
Yes.
meaning the moral law. So I'm persuaded that has to mean, given Paul's context, the Greek poets and philosophers. It's Sophocles, it's Homer, it's Plato, it's Aristotle. Not to say that those are the only persons who had that written on their hearts, but Paul would not be referring to the Confucian tradition, which he did not know, right? Or a New World, like an Aztec or a Mayan tradition of natural law.
Right.
Even though those things exist, he didn't know about them. So what kinds of examples does he have in mind?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Greco-Roman
Indeed.
examples.
Yeah. No, I'm very persuaded by that.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me finish the paragraph here. Albin continues, the precedent established on Mars Hill was to be followed in time not only by the learned Greek fathers, but also by Minucius Felix and Lactantius, Jerome and Augustine in the West. St. Jerome defends his own extensive use of pagan learning on the authority of St. Paul, recalling his Athenian discourse and pointing out that he had, as it were, employed the sword of Goliath against its owner through his references to Greek authors.
Interesting. Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
So that's a Jerome quote?
Apparently.
Wow.
Yeah,
I'm warming up to the guy a little
flair,
bit.
Right? Yeah. He was curmudgeonly, but he could turn a phrase.
That's right.
But there is no basis for believing that Paul ever suspected that he was establishing the tradition of Christian humanism,
Right.
which the Middle Ages inherited.
Interesting. So I guess Albin kind of takes back with one hand what he gives with another.
Right.
Right? He did say that Paul established a tradition of Christian humanism, and then he says that wasn't his intention.
It wasn't his intention, right? And I mean, he kind of sets that dichotomy by comparing, the one verse where Paul kind of warns about, falling prey to the wisdom of the world.
Right.
But then also that fascinating episode at the Areopagus where Paul does seem to be saying to, his
right.
His audience is that I know your poets, right?
Right.
I've read these inscriptions on your
right,
and he said, and he kind of refutes some, but also seems to be saying, you guys kind of get it,
right?
But
right.
here,
one of your poets even says, "In Him we live and move and have our being."
Right,
right. So this has been rightly made into many Christian songs and to many references among believers.
Yeah,
but Paul brings it in from a pagan source.
Yes.
And makes it scripture.
Yeah.
That's to me astounding.
It's astounding. A small digression, though. I think this
most of this has been a digression. Are you kidding me?
Right. I came across this really interesting reading of a passage from the Gospel of John.
Yes.
And this is an episode with Jesus and the disciples that only appears in John.
Oh.
It's not in the synoptics. And it's where it's at the Passover. The Passion is
right.
on the horizon, and John tells us that there were some Greeks that wanted to see Jesus, right? And the disciples let them in.
Do they come through Philip? Am I remembering that correctly?
They come through Philip, but it's strange is that once they're let in, or it seems the Greeks kind of disappear from the episode,
right?
And we just get Jesus's words, and Jesus uses the metaphor of the seed,
right?
And kind of the seed kind of going to its death and then being reborn, and, and then he says to we assume the Greeks,
right,
that I'm that seed, right? And so the reading is that, so why does he use that metaphor for the Greeks? Is because he's kind of tapping into that Eleusinian imagery, like the idea of,
is that the claim?
From death comes life, and so like Paul at the Areopagus, Jesus seems to be saying to the Greeks, like, you get it on this metaphorical level, but I am the incarnation of what you kind of already get.
Wow.
So I think it's a really interesting reading.
It is a really interesting
reading. It's unprovable,
reading.
but
I wonder if it could ever be demonstrated.
Yeah. I don't know.
That is fascinating.
I've heard it framed, the arguments about how, each of the Gospels are kind of geared toward a particular audience. So
Matthew to a Hebrew audience, Mark to a Roman audience,
right,
etc.
Exactly. And John is much more philosophical.
Correct.
Is much more Greeky.
Right.
And so
could the Heraclitus at the beginning with the Logos.
Exactly, right. And so could that inclusion of that episode of the scene where Jesus perhaps uses that kind of that metaphorical death and rebirth language for the benefit of the Greeks.
That is really interesting. Yeah. That's fascinating. At some point, I'm not trying to throw any cold water. Let me rephrase that. I'm not trying to pour any ice cream, any cold milk on this train of thought whatsoever. But at some point, we got to give the people actual Lactantius.
Oh, right.
Because he thought through this, on a level that makes us look like the rank amateurs that we are.
Indeed, right.
Like Canadian hockey players.
Are you bringing us around to some of his actual works?
I'm thinking that's what we should do next. Okay. And maybe, speaking of hockey, it's time for the ads.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the good folks at Ratio Coffee. Ratio Coffee, these guys have been with us for a long time.
Yes,
now,
they have.
Right?
Mark signed on early. I mean, imagine the naivete of that guy.
So what was he thinking? Right. But no, Mark Helwig, our entrepreneur.
That's right.
Has been making for quite some time now these wonderful machines that we highly recommend. The problem that Mark had is, why do you need to go to these bagel barn and breweries? And that's the only place you can get a decent cup of coffee.
They burn the beans. You stand in line. They don't know your name. All that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Or you're at home with your senior cafe.
That's right. Your Dak and Blecker.
And that's just as bad.
Right.
So what? Can't we find something in the middle?
Right.
And he did.
Right.
So what has he done, Dave?
Well, he invented a very lovely, aesthetically pleasing, and extremely simple in its function automatic pour-over machine called the Ratio 8. Mm-hmm. That's the flagship. That's the aircraft carrier, right? The USS... I was going to say Indiana, but I think that one went down.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Okay, never mind. And then the Ratio 6, which is a machine I've never used, but you enjoyed for a long time.
I had it for a long time. Great
and
machine.
Now the Ratio 4.
Yep.
Which is a lovely machine.
Yep, that's perfect for your office desk.
Yeah.
Or if you live in a household where if you're the only person that's drinking coffee, it'd be ideal.
Right. So recently I brewed up some coffee in a non-ratio form.
Oh, why? What are you doing?
It was necessary.
Were you on the road?
Something like that.
Okay,
None of this is real, but and I poured it into my mug.
Yeah.
And I'm walking along the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And the coffee tasted so bitter.
Yeah.
It was so acrid. It's so disgusting that I stumbled a little bit at one of those breaks in the sidewalk.
Yeah. Oh no.
I stumbled a little bit, and in my great frustration as the coffee spilled all down my front and in my face, I let out some mild expletive.
Oh, no.
I said, "Oh, fiddlesticks."
Yeah.
And I thought, if I had just used coffee, if I had just used ratio, I wouldn't be subject to this crackish slang.
Man. How many times are you going to go to this well, right? I feel you got a few more in you.
That's only the second one, Winkle.
I know, man.
And as bad as it is, I thought it up in the last 30 seconds.
Not bad.
Cut me some slack.
Not bad.
All
hey,
right.
Listeners, if you want one of these wonderful machines, do yourself a favor. Go to ratiocoffee.com, RATIO coffee.com.
/
Ad Nauseam.
That's right.
And don't forget the V in the
Spell it
nauseam
correctly.
part. Spell it correctly. And find the machine that you want. put it in the satchel, and what's our coupon code for?
The coupon code is ANRATIO, ANRATIO 2025, AN ratio 2025, and you will receive $20 off at checkout. So that's a good discount. Check it out.
Check it out.
This episode of the Ad Nauseam podcast is also brought to you by the great folks at Hackett Publishing out there in Cambridge, Mass. and Indianapolis Inn. These folks have also been with us from the beginning, and instead of cursing the darkness, they have lit a candle and allowed us all to read by its light.
That's right.
Jeff, what do you like about Hackett? And keep it brief.
I will.
I know you love the covers.
I love the covers. I love the artwork. I love the wide selection, and I love the affordability. You can't beat it.
You nailed it.
I haven't found any other book distributor that has those three things and has them all right in the pocket.
Yes.
Yep.
So they also picked up an imprint that used to belong to Focus Publishing. When they took on Focus Publishing, they got all of the Lingua Latina per se illustrata.
That's right.
And these are the beautiful Hans Orberg books in full color now, both the Familia Romana and the Roma Aeterna. Hackett is putting these out, and they are just fantastic. Really excellent resource for learning Latin. But, Jeff, what if the audience says, I'm not really interested in that. I like something like Japanese history or South American studies.
Well, they got that too.
Okay.
So do yourself a favor. Go to hackettpublishing.com. That's HACKETT publishing.com. Check out their wide variety. Yes, their catalog of classically related works is huge, but they cover all kinds of different corners of academia. You're going to find something that you like. And I'm going to assume of our audience, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably one of those people that loves their home library and wants to build it. And this is a great way to do that within a budget and keep the torch of classics alive to take them in and keep them down. So go to that website, find the books that you want. If you type in this coupon code, AN 2025, so it's AN as in ad nauseum plus the current year. That will get you 20% off your entire order and free shipping.
And we have to make one final little note here, Jeff, if
Yes.
I could. And that is one of the translators of Ovid's Metamorphoses.
Yes.
This is Z. Philip Ambrose. Remember, we have plugged both the Ambrose translation and the...
Stanley Lombardo.
That's correct.
Yep.
So Z. Philip Ambrose, great classicist from the University of Vermont, he passed away, in fact, just this past week.
Is that right?
Yep.
Wow.
So a tip of the hat to an excellent translator whom Hackett features.
Indeed.
Jeff, as we get back into it now, I think it's time to give the people some Lactantius.
Let's do it. So we're going to go directly to his works.
That's correct.
Right.
And I think we should start with one that I think you will like quite a bit,
Okay.
which is On the Deaths of the Persecutors, De Mortibus Persecutororum.
Because it's got some gore and
It's gory.
Okay.
Let's be honest.
Right.
And what I thought we ought to do here is I'll read a little bit of Latin, and then you can give us the translation.
Sure.
So here's how he starts out, and I'm encouraging you listeners, if you have some knowledge of Latin, even if you don't, enjoy the sounds here that Lactantius puts together, because he is a master stylist, right? Like Pico said, not Pico de Gallo, which is your favorite Renaissance philosopher, but Pico Mirandola.
Yes.
Said that he's the Christian Cicero.
Yep.
So here's what he says. Audivit Dominus ordrationes tuas, donata cardrissime, quas in conspectu eis, per omnes hordras quotidie fundebas, ceterorumque fracum nostrordrum, qui gloriosa confessione sempiternam, sibi cordronam pro fidei meritis quaesi erunt.
Nicely done.
Thank you. That's the first sentence of this particular work. And how does that go, Jeff?
That goes, the Lord has heard those supplications, which you, my best beloved Donatus, pour forth in his presence all the day long, and the supplications of the rest of our brethren, who by glorious confession have obtained in an everlasting crown the reward of their faith.
Right. So the first sentence of a work in Greco-Roman antiquity has to be highly programmatic, polished, beautiful. I guess, Jeff, if we can find an analogy, it's like the opening chords of a song. Right, a pop song, or I guess even a classical piece, if you don't catch them in the first, 10, 15 seconds, people are going to tune out.
Indeed.
Do you have an example for us of some really gripping riff?
I think the one that pops to mind is like the Rolling Stones' "Satisfaction." You know that kind of unfurl that dun 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 dun.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Keith
that
Richards
rhythm
grabs you right away.
Right.
I think you're right. You got to hook them very quickly, or you're going to lose them very
Right.
quickly. Yep.
I can give you a classical example, which
Yeah.
is not in any way, meant to be one-upsmanship. My knowledge of classical music is not very great.
Yeah.
But I do know this one here, and that is Beethoven's Piano Concerto. It's number 5, named after Napoleon. And just the opening chords are just so, I don't know what key it's in, but it just comes in really dramatically and bah, and just really grabs you right there.
Indeed, Beethoven was good at that.
Yes.
Pounding those often very dark notes.
Right.
That just kind of hit you over the head.
Right.
Yeah.
And grab you. So that's what Lactantius is doing here. He's getting our attention. Mm-hmm. He goes on in chapter 2, and he starts all the way back with the emperor Tiberius.
Yes.
This is where he says the persecution really began. But then, Jeff, we have to skip ahead,
Yeah.
right?
We got to get to the gore.
Yes, to chapter 4.
Right. So he lays it out that the persecution of the Christians begins under Tiberius. So it's under Tiberius that Christ was crucified.
Right.
So he's saying it starts from the very beginning.
That's right.
Right. And then on the heels of that, you have maybe arguably one of the more famous persecutions under Nero.
Correct.
Right, in the 60s.
Then later you got Domitian.
Later Domitian.
You got some under Marcus Aurelius in the middle of the 2nd century.
Right. And in chapter 4,
Right.
He starts out by talking about this long peace,
Okay.
which is interrupted by the persecution of Decius. So
Okay.
that we're talking throughout the 3rd century.
Yeah, like perhaps 210 to 249, somewhere in there.
Yes. So he writes, the long peace, however, was afterwards interrupted. Decius appeared in the world, an accursed wild beast to afflict the church. And who but a bad man would persecute religion? It seems as if he had been raised to sovereign eminence at once to rage against God and at once to fall. For having undertaken an expedition against the Carpi, who had then possessed themselves of Dacia and Moephia, he was suddenly surrounded by the barbarians and slain, together with a great part of his army. Nor could he be honored with the rites of sepulture, but stripped naked, he lay to be devoured by wild beasts and birds, a fit end for the enemy of God.
Oh.
So it's an interesting kind of counterpoint to some of these episodes in the lives of the saints, where often the gory end of the faithful is often emphasized, is that they were so dedicated to God, they're willing to go to these horrible deaths. But in this, Lactantius says, well, these guys kind of get what's coming to them.
Exactly. And in chapter 5, we have not only the Decian persecutions, but what happened under Valerian, his successor. And then what happened to Valerian, which is he was caught by the Persians and skinned alive.
Oh, man. Right? So, yeah, all these cautionary tales. It's interesting. I think last time we were talking about how one of the things that Lactantius is famous for is about how he doesn't swing a sledgehammer like Tertullian does. No. But here, there is a kind of scared straight quality to it. Like, get in line or this might happen to you.
That's correct. So, Yep. One little final quote before we move on to the next work, and this would be from chapter 7, because it gives us Lactantius's opinion on Diocletian.
Yeah.
Right? Who brought peace to the Roman world. And so you might think that Lactantius would be on the side of Diocletian. After all, it was Diocletian who appointed him to that sweet spot as the imperial rhetor and in Nicomedia. So you want to read the beginning there of chapter 7?
Sure. While Diocletian, that author of ill and deviser of misery, was ruining all things, he could not withhold his insults, not even against God. This man, by avarice partly, and partly by timid counsels, overturned the Roman Empire. For he made choice of 3 persons to share the government with him, and thus, the empire having been quartered, armies were multiplied, and each of the 4 princes strove to maintain a much more considerable military force than any sole emperor had done in times past. That's an interesting take.
Yes, it is.
Is that this feat of organization and efficiency? Here, Lactantius is saying, well, you're creating 3 more people who want everything for themselves.
That's right.
And so you kind of get a repeat of
you quadruple the avarice.
Right. It kind of reminds me of the 1st century BC.
Right.
We have all these competing armies and going against each other in Rome.
Right. For the first time, it occurs to me that a good title for a book on the Tetrarchy would be the Fantastic Four.
I like it.
Yeah. So this goes on for 52 chapters.
Man.
52 small chapters. So it's a reasonable work. I haven't read the whole of it. However, I've done quite a number of little lessons on it on Lat Per Diem if you want to see.
Oh, you have, yeah.
But I think we should mention that the translator was a man named William Fletcher. So this is in the Ante-Nicene Fathers, 1886, Volume 7.
Okay. All right.
I think the translator needs a little bit of credit there.
Yes,
So.
and easily you can track this down online if you want
Oh,
to
sure.
scroll through it. Yep.
And honestly, you could read all 52 chapters in maybe 30 minutes.
Yes, it's all bite-sized.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, we go on from the deaths of the persecutors, and which work are we going to survey
Let's go
next?
to his Divine Institutes,
Okay.
which is the work that he's probably best known for.
That's right. And so we're told that he wrote this sometime between 303 and 311. Mm-hmm. And this is his magnum opus. This is a big work, right?
Yeah.
So Constantine comes to power in 306, and 311 is the Edict of Toleration, the Religio Licita, and then 313 is the Edict of Milan. Mm-hmm. And now Christianity is on a solid footing, you might say, in terms of it's no longer illegal to practice.
Right.
And eventually, under Constantine, it becomes the preferred religion.
Yeah.
So Lactantius, for no other reason than the time he lived, if that were the only thing, makes him an author worth studying.
Definitely. And he's not a fair weather guy, right? His conversion in these writings come before that firm footing comes about.
That's an excellent point. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of personal cost.
Yep.
So I want to give just a quick summary of what's in the Divine Institutes, and then maybe read a little bit of Latin, a little bit of translation.
Please.
So it's divided up into 7 books. You like that number?
7?
Yeah.
It's sacred. It's biblical.
Okay.
Right?
All right. So book 1 is On the False Worship of the Gods. Book 2, The Origin of Error. Where did it come from? Which is a question I typically ask whenever I grade a student's paper. Book 3, The False Wisdom of the Philosophers. So here he takes Cicero to task, among others. Book 4, True Wisdom and Religion. Book 5, Justice. Book 6, True Worship. And Book 7, The Happy Life. So, as the listeners probably know, Seneca wrote a work, De Vita Beata, on the happy life, in which he gives a Stoic account of what it means to live your best life now, right? And so, Lactantius, he's going to try to answer the same question in Book 7.
All right. Now, you have some that you can read some Latin there?
Yes, if you don't mind, I'd just like to read a little bit of an excerpt. So this is the first sentence in Book 1, and it has been labeled by William Radius, the book I'm using, Introduction and Criticism of Ancient Polytheism. So here it goes. Magno et excellenti ingenio virvi, cum se doctrinae penitus dedidissent, quicquid labordris poterat impendi, contemptis omnibus et privatis et publicis actionibus, ad inquirendae veritatis studium contulerant, existemantes multo esse praeclardrius humanardrum divinardrumque rerum investigardre axcirdre rationem quam struendis opibus aut cumulandis honoribus in haerere.
Again, nicely done.
Thank you. That's a nice Ciceronian periodic sentence.
Right. So let me give the translation of this.
Okay.
Once again, this is by William Fletcher.
All right.
Men of great and distinguished talent, when they had entirely devoted themselves to learning, holding in contempt all actions both private and public, applied to the pursuit of investigating the truth whatever labor could be bestowed upon it, thinking it much more excellent to investigate and know the method of human and divine things than to be entirely occupied with the heaping up of riches or the accumulation of honors. All one sentence.
Yeah. So what do you think, Jeff, of the sentiment expressed there by Lactantius? Can you sign up to that? Are you on board with that?
Yeah, I'm on board with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I like this guy. I'm down with the Milkman, right?
Say more if you don't mind.
All right. So, who's he talking about here? Who are these men of great and distinguished talent at the beginning?
I guess it would be men who are devoted to political advancement and personal enrichment primarily.
Yeah. Yes, I'm down with this. So, is he thinking it much more excellent to investigate and know the method of human and divine things than to be entirely occupied with the heaping up of riches or the accumulation of honors? Yeah, right. I like to think of myself along those lines.
Okay,
a certain way of not wanting to pursue things just for their material benefit, but of having in my mind a more lofty sentiments.
So these would be people like Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus and maybe even Porphyry, who was a contemporary of Lactantius, maybe even an associate of Lactantius, who devoted themselves to a life of philosophy rather than merely getting rich.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yep.
So, Jeff, I think what we ought to do next is what some of Lactantius's contemporaries did.
Which is what?
They found the Divine Institutes too long.
Oh, no. Okay.
They said, as we mentioned last week, give us the TLDR version.
All right.
So I'd like to read the first chapter here of the Epitome, and then if you could give us the Blakeney translation. So I'm not going to read the whole of the first chapter because even though the work as a whole is much shorter, this first chapter is long. So here's how it goes. Actually, this is the proemium, the introduction. Quamquam dibinardrum institutionem libri, quosiam pridem ad illustrandam veritatem religionemque conscripsimus, ite legentium mentes instruant, ite informant, ut nec prolixitas pardriat fastidium, nec honorant ubertas, tamen horderum tibi epitomein fieri pentari frater, desideras. Credo, ut ad te aliquid scribam, te umque nomen in nostro qualicunque opera celebratur.
All right, and this is the Blakeney translation of that. Although the 7 books of the Divine Institutes, which I wrote some years ago to illustrate the truths of religion, instruct readers in such a way as to avoid a wearisome prolixity and a burdensome excess, yet, my dear brother, seeing you ask for an epitome of those books, presumably that I may write something to you and that your name be celebrated in my work, such as it is, I shall comply with your wishes, though it is no easy task to compress into a single volume matters already dealt with in 7. So he says, I'll do it, but I'm not happy about it.
Yeah, it sounds like a typical kind of academic statement, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Which is, okay, I'll comply, but you want me to boil this down, right? 7 books, you want me to boil it down to 100 chapters or so? It's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough, right? But if you want this simplified Cliff's Notes version, I'll do what you want.
That's right.
All right, Dave. Let me read the epitome, chapter 5 epitome here, which Blakeney titled "The Testimony of the Sibyls." It goes thusly: It remains to speak of the prophetesses. Varro records the existence of 10 Sibyls: the Persian, the Libyan, the Delphic, the Cimmerian, the Erythraean, the Samian, the Cumaean, the Hellespontine, and the Phrygian, the Tiburtine, called the Sibyl of the Albunea.
Hold on now.
Yeah.
That's a lot of Sibyls,
isn't it?
It's
a lot of Sibyls. Well, you mean you want to have a Sibyl close to wherever you're living.
I guess.
Right? So exactly. So you want the most convenient Sibyl for your neighborhood.
Right. To deal with Sibyl unrest, I guess.
Oh, nicely done. Of all these, there are 3 books of the Cumaean Sibyl alone, containing the destinies of Rome, and they are looked upon as secret. Those of almost all the others are extant separately and usually are so regarded, but these are entitled Sibyllines under a single name. Except that the Erythraean Sibyl, who is said to have lived in the days of the Trojan War, has her own name inscribed in those books. The books of the others are jumbled together. All these prophetesses of whom I have spoken, apart from the Cumaean, whom the 15 are permitted to read, they all bear witness to the fact that there is one God, ruler, maker, father, unbegotten but self-existing, who has been from everlasting and therefore alone ought to be worshipped, alone feared, alone honored by all living people. Their testimonies, because I could not abbreviate them, I have passed by. If you greatly wish for these, you must betake yourself to the books themselves. So if you want more, you got to read my big book. Right?
Yeah.
Now,
so he's complaining a little bit there.
He is complaining, but that's interesting. That I think probably a Tertullian would say, why are you messing around talking about these Sibyls?
Yes, he might.
It's pagan. It's demonic.
Right.
And he's saying no. If you kind of look at them all together and what they're trying to do and what they're expressing is that it's really proof for the existence of one God.
That's correct. So the Cumaean Sibyl, as everybody knows, is painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Yes, as is the Oracle of Delphi.
That's right, because Book 4, right? I don't mean to say Book 4, but the 4th Eclogue of Virgil is thought to represent the prophecy of Christ. Lactantius is following in the wake of Virgil and others.
Indeed.
Jeff, I think he must conclude, right? After squashing 7 books down into just one epitome, one Reader's Digest version, what is the conclusion that he delivers to Brother Pentadius?
Yes, so in the Blakeney translation, this is called the Epilogue to the Epitome.
Okay.
Since these events are true and certain fulfillment, being in agreement with the prophecies uttered by the seers, and since Trismegistus and Histopses and the Sibyls have foretold the same destinies, it is indisputable that all hope of life and salvation rests on the religion of God alone. Accordingly, unless a man accepts Christ, whom God has already sent to free mankind from sin, yes, and will send yet again, unless man acknowledges the supreme God and keeps his commandments and his law, he will suffer those penalties of which I have already spoken. We must despise what is weak and frail, that we may attain what is surely established. We must make light of earthly things, to become ennobled by heavenly things. We must flee from the lures of time, that we may win the joys that are eternal. Let each instruct his own heart unto righteousness, conform to self-control, be prepared and ready for the contest, learn the lessons of virtue, so that, if maybe an adversary declares war, each may not be turned aside from the straight and goodly path by any violence or terror or suffering. that he may never bow and submit to senseless fancies, but with upright heart acknowledge the true and only God. Let him thrust aside the pleasures of sense, by the enticements of which the lofty soul is driven earthward. Let him hold fast innocency, be serviceable to all men, and by his good works obtain incorruptible treasures, to the end that, with God as his judge, he may win for his virtuous deserts either the crown of faith or the prize of immortality.
Wow. Way to wrap it up at Lactantius. Right.
So, I mean, I like that he mentions the Sibyls here because it calls back to the passage we just read. But he seems to be of the mind that there is truth. There is you can find God in these pre-Christian, these pagan sources, but you have to be careful about it.
Right. That's a good summary. And I love the rhetorical fireworks that he brings into the peroration there in good Ciceronian style.
Indeed. Yeah.
Let's make the closing paragraph pull out all the stops, you might say, in terms of the rhetoric.
Yeah.
Nicely done. So, what do you think? Is Pico correct when he says something like, "Iquasse, he equaled Cicero, or maybe even surpassed him"?
Well, I mean, I think that I haven't seen enough or heard enough of the Latin to judge.
That's fair.
But
certainly didn't surpass him in influence.
No. But from what the Latin that you read, it was beautiful. That and those long periodic sentences struck me as very Ciceronian.
Maybe before we say goodbye to this episode, we should give the listeners a brief sample of what's thought to be Lactantius's poetry.
Yeah.
And this is the De Ava Phoenica, the phoenix bird.
Yeah. So, Dave, read a little Latin for us, and then I will offer a translation.
I would love to. So this is written in elegiac couplet. So one line of hexameter followed by a line of pentameter or double hemiepes. However, the very first couplet, I can't figure out what's wrong with the first line because it's not a full hexameter.
Uh-oh.
So I think there's a little bit of fragmentation that has occurred.
Okay.
So we'll do our best here. Est locus in primoriente remotus, qua patet aeterni maxima porta puli. Now we get a couple of real couplets. Nec tantaesti vosia misque propinquis ad ortus, in quo sol verno, fundit ab axa diem. Illic planetiae tractus defundit apertus, nec tumulus crescit, nec cabalalis hiat.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
And this is from the Fletcher translation.
All right.
There is a happy spot, retired in the first east, where the great gate of the eternal pole lies open. It is not, however, situated near to his rising in summer or in winter, but where the sun pours the day from his vernal chariot. There a plain spreads open its tracks, nor does any mound rise, nor hollow valley open itself. But through twice 6 ells that place rises above the mountains, whose tops are thought to be lofty among us.
Can you read a little bit more? Because
Sure.
we haven't gotten to the bird yet.
Right. I think we might have to wait a while.
Okay.
He's
going.
laying it on thick. Here is the
right.
grove of the sun. A wood stands planted with many a tree, blooming with the honor of perpetual foliage. When the pole has blazed with the fire of Phaeton, that place was uninjured by the flames. And when the deluge had immersed the world in waves, it rose above the waters of Deucalion. No enfeebling diseases, no sickly old age, no cruel death, no harsh fear approaches hither, nor dreadful crime, nor mad desire of riches, nor Mars, nor fury burning with the love of slaughter. Bitter grief is absent, and want clothed in rags, and sleepless cares, and violent hunger. No tempest rages there, nor dreadful violence of the wind. Nor does the hoarfrost cover the earth with cold dew. No cloud extends its fleecy covering above the plains. Nor does the turbid moisture of water fall from on high. But there is a fountain in the middle, which they call by the name of living. It is clear and abounding with sweet waters, which bursting forth once during the space of each month, 12 times irrigates all the grove with waters. So he's setting up this golden age type of heaven.
A paradise.
And this is the place from which the phoenix is born and flies forth.
Yes, I can't help but saying, hic genus arboreum procuros tepita surgens, non lapsura solo mitia pomagerit. But I guess we got to stop there.
We do.
There's another 130 lines or so of this poem. It's not very long, but there's the phoenix bird.
Yes.
And the phoenix bird is thought to be the symbol of Christ and his resurrection.
Indeed, right. So it's nice to get a little taste of Lactantius.
Yep.
Seemingly, writing poetry from a kind of a purely classical kind of pre-Christian viewpoint, but maybe layered with metaphor.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some milk-related pun here when you say to get a little taste of Lactantius, but I got nothing.
Man, you might be Lactantius intolerant.
I'm tapped out.
Tapped out. Yep.
But Jeff, we got to get out of here, don't we?
We do. But before we do that, we have this contest.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
But we better make it quick because there's some people trying to get in here.
Oh, well, that's going to distract me.
Okay,
Let's talk about that first.
All right.
Now, who is that banging on the door?
Well, actually, it's representatives from UDIM.
UDIM?
You don't know the UDIM?
No, who are these guys?
It's the United Dairy Industry of Michigan.
Oh, are they upset about all the Milkman jokes?
Yes, they are. And their board includes members from the Michigan Milk Producers Association, the MMPA.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You don't want to run afoul of the MMPA.
It's a rough crew.
That's right. Board members like Corby Worth,
Oh, man.
Scott Lamb, and don't get me started on the treasurer, Burke Larson.
Oh, you do not want to run afoul of Burke Larson. Forget about it. No.
So in deference to our dairy superiors, right?
Right.
We better make this quick.
Right. So we want to remind our listeners of this contest next month, which starts from...
Actually, this month when
actually,
you're listening to
this.
On the 26th.
Yes, we will have a drawing where one of our listeners will win a brand new Ratio 4 and shipped right to their door.
Incredible. The 4 to the door.
Yeah, so if you want to throw your hat in the ring, write to Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget the V, and write this word, quatuor.
Quatuor, is it, eh?
Quattuor, which is the Latin word for 4.
Yes, and that will get them entered in the drawing, and they could win a Ratio 4 shipped directly to their door.
Excellent. So don't hesitate. There's some time, but time is running out.
That's
and
correct.
Dave, also before we get out of here, if our listeners want to learn some Latin, they want to learn some Greek,
oh yeah,
you can help them.
I can, certainly. They should go to latinperdiem.com. Latinperdiem.com. Check out my Greek programs. The Moss method is there. 4 modules of strong Greek learning. It will take you from, what is that, Jeff?
Oh, that is from neophyte to erudite.
Yes. So I've been studying Greek and teaching it for many, many decades. I've taken all that knowledge and compressed it down, just like Lactantius did with the Divine Institutes, into his Epitome, and I'm happy to share it with you for a reasonable price. As I like to say, there may be better teachers out there, but I don't think you can beat this value. If you want to get expertise and you want to pay a reasonable price, I'm your guy.
Indeed. All right, excellent. We also have people to thank, as
Yes, we
always.
do.
We got Mishka, our wonderful engineer.
That's right.
Helps us turn this around, and she's responsible for the wonderful audio quality.
That's right.
And, keeping it really tight.
Then Scott Van Zen with the arpeggiated guitar, and Mr. Ken Tamplin, who gives us the bumper music, the intro and outro, generously sharing with us their high-quality music. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting to me to have that kind of incongruity between the somewhat dry and esoteric topics that we may occasionally cover.
That's right.
But then something that's, a little more avant-garde.
Yes, indeed. Right. We are so thankful for the generosity of those guys. Hey, if you want to get a shout out, you have a question, a complaint, you have an idea for an episode, do not hesitate to contact us. You can write to Dave at adnauseam.com. Don't forget that V.
Or you can contact Jeff at adnauseam.com. We trust you can spell Jeff. Don't forget the V in the word ad nauseum. If I can give just another little plug here, if you do want to sign up for one of the courses, I'm running a special. You can use the coupon 10+. That's the numeral 10, and the word plus, and that will give you 10% off anything on the website.
Fantastic.
So, Jeff, what are we doing for next week?
Oh, it's a TBA.
Another TBA.
But I'm going to throw this out there. I think it's time we tackled another Greek drama.
Oh, it's been a while.
And I have a couple of ideas that I'll throw out to you once we're off mic.
I would love that. I would love that. That's kind of in the Cash theme, I would say.
Yes.
Johnny Cash and Greek drama. They got a lot in common.
Yes, they do.
And coming down the road is we're going to have some Tacitian episodes from one of our colleagues over at Hope College.
Oh, yes.
That's on the horizon. And hopefully get Peter Saris back in here before long.
Fantastic.
And I think, Jeff...
Yeah.
You have the gustatory parting shot.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, I like this one because it's embedded in is a milk illusion.
Okay.
Because you can't make milk chocolate without the milk. Right?
I think that's true.
So this is a quote from one
Checks out.
Judith Viors, who said, "Strength is the capacity to break a chocolate bar into 4 pieces with your bare hands and then just eat one of the pieces."
Nice. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.